Perhaps one of the most chilling predators of the African bush is the hyena. Portrayed as a dim-witted scavenger, these animals are actually highly intelligent and skilled hunters. They can bring down large prey, much larger than themselves, such as buffalo, and can work together in groups called clans. They have a bad reputation and are most famed for scavenging, relying on others to do the hard work, whilst feasting on the leftovers, crunching on the bones. They are generally considered nocturnal hunters, but are also active during the day. Stories of them snatching people from their beds as they sleep peacefully at night, or taking babies from around campfires, are terrifying realities of living in or visiting rural Africa. The power of their bite is one of the most powerful in the animal kingdom. In comparison to an average human's bite of 162 psi, the hyena is estimated to be as much as 1100 psi. They have been recorded killing dogs with a single bite to the neck. Once they lock on to their prey, there is no letting go. Their bite is even stronger than some of the big cat species. The story of 5-year-old Abel is one of the worst hyena attacks of all time and is truly incredible. He suffered the most horrendous injuries imaginable and, miraculously, lived to tell the tale. Surgeons were shocked when Abel was rushed into hospital. He was hardly recognizable. From the ferocious and brutal hyena attack, his lower jaw had been ripped clean off. His upper lip and right ear had been torn away. He struggled to breathe. His life was hanging on the line. On June 18, 2015, Kefyalik was inside her home whilst her 5-year-old son, Abel, played outside. She and her family lived in the rural village of Debina in Ethiopia's Kanso highlands. The little village was surrounded by countryside, an agricultural landscape interspersed with trees and shrubs. It is a place where cultural traditions remain strong, where there is a tight-knit community and a peaceful way of life. Abel was a happy little boy. He was always playing with his friends, shrieking in delight as they chased each other and played games. But on this particular day, his shrieks turned to screams, ear-piercing screams that made Kefyalik stop what she was doing and rush outside. At first, she thought that Abel was just playing around. Then, she thought he may have fallen and hurt himself. Perhaps the other children were being too rough and there had been a scuffle. All these thoughts raced around her head when she first heard the scream, but it was none of these reasons that had caused the young boy to scream. Instead, what she saw will haunt her for the rest of her days. At first, she didn't see Abel. He had been playing just feet from the house, but now he had vanished. When she looked around, she saw drag marks in the dusty red earth. She ran along the trail, following the drag marks, following the screams. Then she saw him, her 5-year-old boy, in the jaws of a ferocious hyena. The animal had appeared from nowhere. It had smelt the children playing and had run at the youngsters, grabbing Abel around the head. The other children had fled the scene in terror as soon as the hyena grabbed Abel. It had dragged the boy for 400 yards through the rough ground and through the undergrowth. There, at the end of the trail, was Abel lying on the ground, a hyena biting on the young boy's head. Kefyalik screamed in terror when she saw them. Immediately she ran at the hyena, yelling and shouting. She didn't fear for her own safety. She didn't hesitate. She did what any mother would do and ran to protect her child. Abel's screams had now stopped. He had no fight left to give. The hyena ripped off the boy's jaw and lifted its head, its jowls dripping with blood. Kefyalik raced up to it as it resumed biting Abel on his head and face. She jumped onto the hyena, pulling and tugging at the hunched creature until it let go of the boy and skulked off into the surrounding undergrowth. The hyena was gone, but the damage had already been done. Kefyalik rushed to her son's side. He lay still, his tiny body limp on the dry, dusty ground. He was hardly recognizable. Amongst the pouring blood, his face was mangled and disfigured. His face had been ripped in half. The hyena had torn his lower jaw from his head. His mouth was now gaping open with half of his tongue missing. An ear had been severed from the side of his head. His eyes were closed. It must have been the most distressing sight for his mother. When Kefyalik picked up her boy, tears streaming down her face, she felt Abel's chest rise and fall. He was still breathing. He was unconscious, but he was still alive. She raced to find help and rushed him to the local medical post. There was nothing they could do for him. His injuries were too severe. They didn't have the equipment or the trained staff to save Abel's life, so his mother rushed him to the local hospital, farther away. Running through the doors with her son dying in her arms, she was desperate, but they only had bad news for her. They too said there was no hope for the boy's survival there. They simply didn't have the staff or equipment to deal with the situation. He needed to be taken for specialist treatment in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. But that was a grueling 7-hour car ride away using Ethiopia's rural roads. Kefyalik had to try. She couldn't sit back and do nothing. She knew Abel would die if she stayed where she was. She jumped in a vehicle and headed northwards. With every bump in the road and every corner they rounded, Kefyalik prayed little Abel would make it. But it was going to be a long shot. Would the little boy's heart hold out? Could he survive such an ordeal? As the hours ticked by, it seemed less and less likely. After the agonizing journey, they finally made it to St. Paul's Hospital. When he arrived, Abel was in a critical state. He was rushed to intensive care, where he was resuscitated and intubated. When he was stable enough, he was taken to surgery. Because his lower jaw and muscles had been torn away, there was a danger that his windpipe could collapse. Doctors inserted a small metal frame to hold his windpipe open to help him breathe. During the surgery, his father, Mesfrin, who was at work at the time his son was attacked, arrived at the hospital shortly after hearing the bad news. Looking at his son through the glass window, he knew there was no hope for him. The injuries were shocking. They were unsurvivable. At least that's what Mesfrin thought. Doctors told Abel's parents that he had less than a 10% chance of making it. But his parents were fighters just as much as their son, and Mesfrin spotted a poster on the hospital corridor's wall. It was an advert for Facing Africa, a charity that offered facial reconstruction surgery to people in Ethiopia. It was the hope that Abel needed. With such serious injuries, Abel couldn't eat, drink, or speak. He had to be fed through a nasal tube. Staff from Facing Africa agreed to meet Abel and his parents and discuss their options. They took photos of the boy's injuries and sent them to the UK, where the charity's head office is located. From there, the decision to reconstruct Abel's face was made. A team of volunteer surgeons was brought together, and Abel underwent 9 hours of surgery to help rebuild his face and jaw. They used bone and skin from his leg to reconstruct his lower jaw, the first operation of its kind in Africa. For now, Abel can talk, eat, and drink unaided. Just days after the surgery, he was able to begin moving his new lower jaw. 4 months later, he was back playing with his friends, showing glimmers of the happy, playful little boy that he once was. As he grows, he will need further surgery, but for now, he has more or less the same ability he had before the attack. None of this would have been possible without charitable donations to Facing Africa's charity. It is incredible what surgeons can do to save someone's life. It is even more incredible what the human body can endure. Abel had survived a hyena attack that would have brought most adults to their terrifying final affliction.